Hello everyone, welcome to the next video in the series of videos where we talk about the PACE model. Right now we're going to be looking at the third stage of it, which is the co-construction phase. This is typically where teachers feel the most nervous because this is a huge shift in practice from what we've done before, from explicit grammar teaching to now co-constructing it with our students. So we're going to talk about that. And so the big word that I really want to emphasize in this is actually the word with. So prior to this, we've been really, really good at giving knowledge. Well, we're the ones that know everything. We figured it all out. We learn the language, and we give them what they need to know. Now we're going to have them doing a lot of the work. So I really think that that word with is going to become hugely important in what we talk about. So let's do a quick review of what PACE is. So PACE is one of the models for discovery grammar. And we've looked at it in terms of one big video where we talked about what is it, how does it work, what does it look like. Then we looked at it in terms of individual videos, one on presentation where we talked about good interpretive strategies to help learners go through either an authentic text, a teacher-written text where the grammar is present in terms of pre-activities, in terms of during activities, and post-activities. Then we had a separate video where we talked about the attention phase, which is the easily overlooked phase, but really, really important to set you up for success in the co-construction. So this is the phase where we had learners actually stop focusing on the meaning for a very, very brief time, and now focus on the form and how that form helps us to understand the meaning of it. Now we're going to look at the co-construction, and then in a separate video, we're going to look at extension. So let's talk about that co-construction phase. So prior to this, you had them all set up and you drew their attention to the grammar point that you wanted them to notice. So you either color-coded or you bolded whatever words you wanted them to notice. So you've kind of set them up for that success, right? So now it's time to figure out, okay, what is that grammar point and how do we form it? That's kind of our goals of the co-construction phase, is for us, both parties, myself and the students, to figure out what this grammar point is and how do we use it, all right? So let's talk about how we're going to start this. So I always started out with a think, pair, share because I find that that works better than just having a full-on conversation or just starting out with talking to each other, right? So I always say by yourself, I want you to write down all of your observations, your predictions, your questions, your hypotheses, all that sort of stuff. I make them write it down because what I've found and what I've been reading in terms of some of the research I've seen is that when you write it down, you feel a little bit more confident in your answers. And when you have something written down, you feel like you have something to share with a partner or share with a group. Okay? And I tell them they can write down anything, any of the observations, any predictions, like whatever you have is great. I want you to notice everything that you possibly can because that discovery is extremely important. And kind of gets us away from, all right, here's the information. Now it's like, all right, let's figure out the information yourself here. So after a few minutes of them silently writing these things down, and they'll usually ask you a couple of questions in between, and it's really hard not to answer them right away because you're like, all right, just keep working on it. You'll figure it out. Then you're going to turn with your partner and you're going to share what you wrote down. Look at, all right, I wrote that down too. That's really interesting. Or, wow, I didn't notice it that way. You have that. I have this. We have different points of view on this. And I think that those conversations are super important. And then let's share out with the whole class. Because now I feel like they've built that sort of rapport with their partner, especially if they have an answer that one person wrote down and the other person wrote down. It becomes like, all right, I feel like that's something because there's no way that it's just me. Somebody else must have noticed this now, right? So in terms of how you do a whole class share, it kind of depends on your class. Some classes are not going to participate in terms of like, let me share out my answers with the whole class. They might just be a little bit more reserved, they might be a little bit more shy, they might be afraid of being wrong, which is a huge, huge thing in all of this that we try to promote, but it's still a reality for a lot of our students. So depending on your class, depends on how you're going to do this. You could do a Padlet where you have everybody share their answers. You could do post-it notes where you maybe have different stations around the room of your questions, your predictions, those sorts of things. Or if your class is comfortable, you could do a full class share. And all of those, I think, are very, very valid ways of going about this. So let's talk about what you're doing as the teacher. So as the teacher, your job is to ask students to show what they've noticed. You're kind of in that role of asking questions. You're going to find that a lot. You're kind of coaching them through this. So you're always asking them different questions about what they notice. You're going to ask those probing questions to kind of get them to co-construct the meaning in the formation. So they might give you half of an answer that's correct, and you might ask them to go a step further and figure out a little bit more with it, right? and you're asking them to focus on the meaning and the formation, all right? Your job is to kind of jotting down all the ideas, and I mean all of the ideas, whether they're right or whether they're wrong, because they both kind of give you a lot of information. So if you're doing a Padlet, you can actually manipulate things around on the screen. If you're doing Post-it notes, same thing. If you're jotting things up on the board, if you're doing a full class share, you can organize the thoughts however works for you and works for them. The reason I say right ideas and wrong ideas is because now you have an idea of where things could be a little bit tricky for them as they go to produce this language structure. If they go into this thinking that it's the future tense, but it's actually the past tense, you're going to do a lot more input so that they see that it's the past tense to kind of help those misconceptions that they may have had. The big thing is that this is going to be a dialogue between you and the students. This is not you giving every bit of information you possibly can. You want to ask questions and you want them to answer. They might ask you questions, right? And we'll talk about how to go about those. But this is a back and forth, and it's really, really important that you have that. So community building in the beginning of the year, this might be something you build in so that you find ways that you can let students have that back and forth with you, just so that this will be a little bit easier for you. Let's talk about what you're not doing in this stage. So this is really, really hard. You are not going to say if their ideas are right or wrong, because all of their ideas are really valid. So if you say, yes, that's exactly right, well, the kid that had something different is then not going to really participate as much in this, and the kids that had the same ideas are going to participate more. So you really want everybody joining in. This is probably the hardest part, is that sometimes you get to a point where you think that they've co-constructed a lot of it, and there's still a lot more that they can co-construct. So we jump in where we have kids say, oh, I noticed that those verbs, I've noticed, if it's a subjunctive, I've noticed that, oh, that's the opposite ending. And you don't let them go further with that. And you go, yes, that's the subjunctive. And now let me tell you everything that the world has ever told me about the subjunctive so you can love it and learn it. Keep going. Always just try to exhaust as much out of it as you can. So here are some expressions and questions that I ask in my co-construction with my students. So I'll ask them, all right, when do we think we use this if it's a tense, right? And is this the present tense, past tense, future tense? When do I use this? And then I'll ask them questions, well, what happens when you talk in the yo form? What happens when we talk in the to form, right? If depending on what it is in these videos, in the video, in the article, in the resource, whatever it is, I'll ask them. And then sometimes those subject pronouns aren't in there, and they might be able to figure out patterns of like, well, nosotros forms usually end in amos or some sort of MOS. Let me see if I try it out. I'll ask, do you see any patterns with AR verbs? Let me point out some AR verbs here real quick for you. Do you see anything that all of these verbs have in common? What about ER verbs? Do you see any IR verbs in there? Then I'll ask them, do you see any verbs that really don't follow that pattern? Right? Do you see, we figured out something with AR, something's going on there, but like there's some that really don't follow that, right? Do you think that those could be some irregulars? What verbs do you think they come from? I'll ask them a lot of the times, they'll give me something, I'll say, what makes you say that? They'll notice, oh, those endings are opposite. What makes you say that? Can you give me an example of that? Sometimes they might be a little bit reluctant in terms of what they are producing, or they might have noticed something and they don't tell you, or maybe they didn't notice it. So then what I'll do is this thing where I'll say, I'll give you an example if you can give me 2 more examples. So I'll point out something for you, because again, this is a dialogue of back and forth. I'll point out one for you. I want you to point out 2 more for me. Are there any key words or phrases that help you figure this out? Like in the subjunctive, you'll see those expressions. When I did present perfect, I repeated the word recientemente a lot, right? So anything that repeats itself that I didn't necessarily draw your attention to, but now you know where to look for it a little bit. I'll say to them, all right, let's test your idea. You guys figured this out. You think this is how it works? All right. I want you to write 2 sentences modeled just like this one here, and I want you to pick some different verbs, right? Like, give me some other AR verbs that you could use to make this work. Do you think that your hypothesis is correct? Can you think of a situation when we could use this tense, right? Especially like things like subjunctive, it's mostly opinion-based, right? So they'll start to put together, well, all these are opinions. Future tense, well, this is when we talk about things that are going to happen or will happen. So I'll always try to bring that communication back into it. So here's kind of my go-to order, right? So I'll always start out by asking, is this present, past, or future? Just to kind of give them that context. I'll ask them to find patterns with specific subject pronouns. I'll ask them to find patterns with regular verbs first. I'll ask them to notice any irregular verbs. And then I'll kind of give them the whole, like, when do you use this tense? What's this tense really for? In the final stages of co-construction, when you really feel like you've exhausted everything you possibly can, you're not getting any more information, or you feel like, wow, they've really discovered all of this, this is the point where you can jump in and notice that I'm going to say fill in the knowledge gaps. So if they noticed most subject pronouns, but they missed eos, give them eos. Tell them what eos is at that point. That's okay. Because what this isn't implicit, this isn't explicit, this is discovery, where they've discovered what they can. Let me fill in what you didn't notice. If there's an irregular verb that you didn't pick up on, well, let me tell you how this irregular verb, this one's here, this is the verb it comes from, right? So a lot of the times we'll say things like this tense is used to talk about the future, used to talk about opinions, right? You identified this pattern, which is how we form the present perfect, for example. We didn't see the subject pronoun, so let me tell you how it's set up. Or can you take a guess how it's set up? Here are some regular verb examples. You noticed these examples. Let me show you some that may or may not have been in the text just to kind of reinforce what you noticed. Here are some more irregular verbs with examples, right? Some of these might have been in there, some of these might not have been, just to kind of give you some more ideas here. Most important, this is used to communicate because this is why it's important, right? I use this to talk about what I have recently done. I use this to express opinions. I use this to make recommendations. I use this to explain what I did yesterday, right? Explaining why this is important for communication is huge for them, because otherwise they just view it as a grammar point, when in reality I want them to view it as a reason to use language. Keep calm and speak the target language is my kind of go-to with this. I personally believe that this all can be done, novice included, can be done in the target language. So that's a question that I get a lot about this, is do I just revert to English? I tend to say that this can be done in the target language with lots and lots of supports for all levels. And the reason that I say the supports need to be there is because sometimes they don't know how to express their ideas, or you get a lot of como se dices. So let me show you, these are the expressions that I give my kids. So in Spanish, I'll give them these expressions, and we use them all year too. Yo veo okay, yo noto okay, yo observo okay. Just for them to be able to talk about their sort of observations. They know the word singular and plural, right? If it's an adjective thing, they can figure that out. Masculino, femenino. La forma, yo, tu, él, ella, all those subject pronouns, they know how to say la forma and then whatever subject pronoun it is. They can probably, or you can teach them presente, pasado, futuro, one of those questions that I ask them all the time. Letras del alfabeto, right? I can have them say A, B, C, like whatever letter it is, they can say that letter. Maybe you need to do a quick review of the alphabet because it's been a while since Spanish 1 potentially. But having them use the alphabet to express what they notice is very, very possible for them. Creo que es para hablar de, pienso que es para hablar de is like how you're going to have them express how you use this to communicate. Se usa para comunicar, like how is this used to communicate things? Se usa para comunicar lo que pasa en el futuro. Creo que es para hablar de eventos en el pasado. Pienso que es para hablar de mi opinión, right? Check esa frase aquí. So if I want to draw their attention, or if they want to draw their attention to a certain phrase, where I say, where like they're working with their partner, and they're like, well, look at this sentence right here. This is an example of blah, blah, blah. Mira ese verbo regular o irregular aquí. Two things they can also say. Regular and irregular and verbo. So if they're talking to each other, or if they're talking to you and they have a specific one they want you to notice, or esta frase o ese patrón se repite, I can teach the word patrón, se repite, well, it repeats itself all over here. Here's an example, right? So by giving them this language, I'm now enabling them to be able to do this in Spanish. If I was to do this with no sort of placement in front of them or no sort of vocabulary, it would be really difficult for them. So I think that this is a good thing, and I give you a copy of this in the notes from Schoology. I think this is a really good tool that you can also add to, that students can use so that they can feel comfortable co-constructing with you in the target language.